I was supposed to talk about this for a while now, but I didn't think I was going to keep seeing a lot of people saying that Michigan is better than Georgia. And Michigan is not better than Georgia. And let me tell you guys why. Look, I get that you are really concerned with Carson Beck at quarterback because you don't really know what he has in him because we haven't really seen a lot of him. We haven't seen Carson Beck go and get a big win on the road against a rival. And it is fair to say that J.J. McCarthy and Michigan have the advantage over Georgia in the quarterback department. And when it comes to the offensive line, I mean, it's either or. Either Michigan, you can say, has a better offensive line than Georgia. You can say Georgia has a better offensive line than Michigan. I don't think either one is a wrong answer, but everything else, I think, obviously favors Georgia. Georgia has better receivers. I think they're better up front on the defensive line than what Michigan is. Like, Michigan has some really good defensive linemen, but the defensive linemen that Georgia recruits are different compared to anybody else in college football, fam. Like, they are recruiting monsters. They're recruiting 300 plus guys who run 4.82s. Does Michigan have a Jalen Himothy Carter on their roster? No, they don't. Do they have a Jordan Davis at 330 pounds running 4.82 on their roster? No, they don't. Now, they got some pretty athletic players up front, but they don't have the kind of X-Men and the kind of mutants that Georgia has. And let's just be honest about this. When you think of Michigan, what do you think about in terms of their offensive identity? They're a diet version of Georgia. You ever go to Walmart and you go to the cereal aisle and you see the Fruit Loops, and then right next to the Fruit Loops, you got the off-brand Great Value Fruit Loops? That's what Michigan kind of is when I think about them. I think they are a great value brand of Georgia, which is why I can't consider them to be better than the Georgia Bulldogs. And I understand that they have a lot of talent coming back. Jim Harbaugh is really excited about this team. He called this the best team that he's ever had, and he thinks that he has 22 players that are good enough to get drafted. But even though he has one of his most talented teams, I think you can make the same argument for another team in their same conference who I think they need to be more worried about rather than focusing on Georgia and making practices dedicated towards focusing on beating Georgia. And they need to make sure that they can extend their winning streak over Ohio State to 3, because Ohio State has a lot of motivation going into this year. And I think that they take great offense to Michigan dedicating a practice day to beating Georgia and not focusing on them. Really? Like, Ohio State's roster is just as good as what Michigan is. For all you Michigan fans who say, man, we got a lot of guys who are going to get drafted next year, so does Ohio State, fam. JTT is going to be a potential first-round pick. You look at whoever they have at quarterback, I'm not worried about it. Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, both locks to be first-round picks in next year's draft. They got some really good offensive linemen. They're stacked on defense. It's just a matter of if Jim Knowles is going to be able to have that defense playing up to the level of talent that they have. Tommy Eichenberg at linebacker, who is probably the best linebacker in college football. Like, I don't get why people are trying to say Michigan is better than Georgia when I don't even think they're better than Ohio State. And even if you do think that Michigan is better than Ohio State, it's only really because of the quarterback situation and the fact that you have more experience and more proven productivity out of your quarterback than whatever Michigan is going to be throwing. Well, compared to whatever Ohio State is going to be throwing out there at QB this year. I don't think that Michigan is better than Georgia because they don't have the receivers that Georgia has. Georgia, even though they aren't a school that's known for pumping out NFL wide receivers left and right, they got some really good receivers on their roster this year. They got Dominic Lovett out of the transfer portal from Missouri. He was one of the best receivers in the transfer portal from this cycle. And then you got Ladd McConkey returning. You got Brock Bowers, arguably the greatest tight end in college football history. There are plenty of weapons on this Georgia offense. And if you want to beat Georgia, you're not going to beat them with the ground and pound mentality that Jim Harbaugh has. You trying to be more physical than Georgia plays right into the strengths of Georgia. Georgia wants you to try to beat them up front. With those 300 plus guys they got running 4.82, they rather you do that than you try to throw the football on them, because then you got to make things a little bit more difficult. If you want to try to play bully ball with Georgia, they love that. Because I promise you, you're not going to win trying to play bully ball with Georgia. If Michigan ever plays Georgia, I promise you, they're not going to obliterate Georgia up front the way they do Ohio State. And you see, when it comes to Michigan, they don't have the kind of team that Ohio State has to really give Georgia a legitimate challenge, in my opinion. If you want to beat Georgia, you got to have three things. You got to have the ability to be balanced on offense, a great quarterback that can make NFL level throws, which JJ McCarthy has shown the ability to do, but can he do it consistently? And three, you gotta have wide receivers who can challenge Georgia's secondary. Georgia has the best secondary in college football. Just because they lost Kelee Ringo doesn't mean that this secondary got worse. Kelee Ringo was a liability, and any Georgia fan that really watches the Bulldogs will agree with that. And anybody who really watched college football last year, who really understands the game of football, would know that losing Kelee Ringo isn't really that big of a loss. This is going to be still one of the best secondaries in college football. And we've seen at times when Michigan has been unable to run the football and they've had to win games throwing the football, that isn't really their strong suit. Do we not forget what happened to Michigan against TCU, a team who they were supposed to beat in the semifinals round, who everybody considered a lock to make it to the national championship? JJ McCarthy really struggled against TCU secondary. And if JJ McCarthy struggles against TCU, why wouldn't he struggle against Georgia? And you also got to understand that Michigan doesn't have the talent at receiver that Georgia has. And Michigan, overall, from a recruiting standpoint and the recruiting rankings, they don't have anywhere of the blue chip talent that Georgia has. Georgia has one of the highest blue chip ratios in all of college football. Michigan recruits at a high level, but they don't recruit at a insanely elite level that Georgia does. So Georgia, just based off recruiting and talent alone, they're going to have the better team. Now, obviously, recruiting rankings don't mean everything. They're not the end-all, be-all. Just because you recruit better than your opponent doesn't mean you're necessarily going to beat them all the time. But normally the team that has the better recruiting classes with more talent and has great coaching normally wins these kinds of matchups. But what makes Michigan so interesting is because they are really good at player development. Jim Harbaugh does an insane job at developing the players that they get out of high school. But when you're going against Georgia, it's a different animal. And I'm not SEC biased. I'm one of those people that can come on here and tell it how it is. But I don't think Michigan is better than Georgia. I don't even think they're better than Ohio State. And even if you want to make that argument for them being better than Ohio State, it really is only because the experience that they have at QB with JJ McCarthy and whoever Ohio State throws out there being unproven. But I don't think Michigan really is a better team than Georgia. And if Michigan was to play Georgia today, I think that they would get their feelings hurt. Honestly, I'm not saying that Georgia would completely dominate Michigan the way they did but the last time they played, but I'm pretty confident that they would beat Michigan at least by 2 touchdowns. A lot of people are really sleeping on Carson Beck. I don't get this whole narrative, oh, he's unproven. Like, you act like Carson Beck is a 2-star. Didn't Georgia just win back-to-back national championships with Stetson Bennett, who was what, a walk-on? And you mean to tell me that they can't win their 3rd straight title with somebody who is one of the highest rated quarterbacks coming out of his recruiting class being the dog from the 904? I think a lot of people need to go do some research and go do their homework on Carson Beck, because some of y'all are really doubting Georgia because of Carson Beck, and that's one of the dumbest things you can do. Georgia recruits the best players in the country. They're not lacking in quarterback, especially when it comes to talent, and even then, Carson Beck is way more talented than Stetson Bennett. Everybody's knock on Stetson Bennett is, well, Georgia won a championship with him and he wasn't that talented. Okay, so you mean to tell me they improve at quarterback, get a more talented quarterback with a way stronger arm, and yet some reason quarterback is just a weakness for them? I think instead of calling quarterback a weakness for Georgia, we should just say it's a little bit of a question mark, even though it shouldn't. We should give Georgia the benefit of a doubt that they're going to have a seamless transition from Stetson Bennett to Carson Beck because of their Georgia. They don't rebuild, they reload, and they recruit really well at quarterback. Their backup is Brock Vandagriff. He probably could start on a handful of teams this season in the Big Ten. He was also highly touted coming out. I don't think quarterback is the sole reason for what makes Michigan better than Georgia. What is Michigan better at any position than Georgia going into this season? They're not better at receiver. I think their offensive lines are just about equal. If you look up the best offensive lines in college football, either Georgia or Michigan are going to be number one. Whoever is in number one is without a doubt going to be number two. Now, if you want to give the edge to Michigan's offensive line, okay, cool. Even though the gap between Michigan and Georgia's offensive lines are not that big. Georgia has great depth too. They get a starter injured and it's next man up. Their defensive line is better. And you Michigan fans can argue with that, fight me on that all you want to, but you guys remember what the hell you walked into when you got mollywopped by Georgia in the college football playoffs a couple of years ago. Their defensive line is different, bruh. It really is different. I don't think a lot of people who follow the Big Ten understand the kind of animals that Georgia recruits down south, bruh. They are recruiting meta-humans. Now, Michigan has had their fair share of freaks. Rashawn Gary was a freak, and you got some freaks on the defensive line, but you don't have a whole entire defensive line with cyborgs like Georgia does. Look at their recruiting class right now. Look at their offensive lines and their defensive lines. They got guys on the offensive line. They're like 6'7", 300 and something plus, running insane 40 times with crazy athleticism and upside. Georgia recruits monsters. They recruit creatures of havoc up front. And I'm trying to tell you, Michigan fans, like, y'all really say y'all want Georgia until you get Georgia and you come to the realization that, hey, like, we need to change some things around because we're not equipped to beat Georgia. Until you can get better receivers and get better production out of your wide receiving core, you're not going to beat Georgia. When's the last time Georgia lost a game because the team was just more physical than them? I can't remember the last time that shit happened. Even when Alabama upset Georgia in the SEC championship game a couple of years back, it took a historical performance out of Bryce Young, and it had a good group of wide receivers. The quarterbacks that have had their best performances against Kirby Smart's defense have been Joe Burrow and CJ Stroud. And you know what they've all had in common? They had elite receivers who they were throwing the football to. Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Terrence Marshall. Does Michigan have that kind of talent at receiver? Because you're not just going to ground and pound Georgia into oblivion. Because I promise you, if you're a Michigan fan and you go up to a Georgia fan or you go up to Kirby Smart and you were to talk some trash to Kirby Smart and say, Michigan is going to beat y'all because we're going to ground and pound y'all up front, you know what Kirby Smart's going to do? He's first of all going to tell you to
come on now, dog. Come on, man.
And then he's going to laugh at you. He's going to say, okay, try to ground and pound us to the ground all you want to and see how far that gets you. When's the last time Georgia ever got manhandled up front by somebody? This is Michigan's identity. Michigan's identity is being tougher than you up front. We're going to bully you to the ground, and there's nothing that you're going to do about it. You see, I think Michigan is a good matchup for Ohio State. They always get the best of Ohio State over the last couple of years for a reason, because Ohio State isn't equipped to handle that kind of physicality. But for some reason, Ohio State is a better matchup and a more difficult matchup for Georgia. You want to know why? Because I know where you Michigan fans are about to go. Georgia narrowly lost to Ohio State by a missed field goal. So if they can barely escaped Ohio State. What makes you think that they're so better than Michigan, JT? Because Ohio State's team is constructed differently. Their scheme is constructed differently from you. You see, what a lot of you people fail to understand is that football is also about matchups. It's also about schematics. And Ohio State has everything that you need to challenge Georgia and give them a competitive game because they're not a one-trick pony. You're not going to beat Georgia trying to ground and pound them to the ground because that's not going to work. You're not going to out-physical Georgia. You have to be able to be balanced and you have to beat them on the outside, on the perimeter. And if you can't do that, you're not going to have a shot at beating Georgia, which is something that I don't think Michigan really has. Now, I'm going to reiterate this one last time. I'm not saying that Michigan will get ran out the building by Georgia. If Michigan and Georgia played today on a neutral field, I think Georgia wins by at least 14. And if they were playing on the road and Michigan and Ann Arbor, I think that they would still beat Michigan by 10 points. Georgia is the best team in college football. I keep seeing a good amount of people, not a lot of people, but there's a good percentage of people out there who consider Georgia to be the number one team in college football going into this season, which I think is highly disrespectful. Georgia is coming off their back-to-back national championship win. They deserve to be ranked as the number one team in college football. And then if you don't have them as your number one team in college football, I think you're being a tad bit disrespectful to what Kirby Smart and Georgia has done over the last couple of years. To be the man, you have to beat the man. And Michigan hasn't done anything to deserve the right to even be mentioned in the same category as Georgia. Until Michigan can show us that they have what it takes to win a college football playoff game and actually be able to live up to all this hype and expectation, I don't want to hear anything else about them being better than Georgia when they're not. Prove it to me on the field. You can make fun of Georgia's cupcake schedule all you want to, but one thing about Georgia is that anytime they have to get up for a big game, they always are ready. You can laugh at their schedule all you want to, but look what they did to Oregon week 1. Look what they did to TCU. For all you people who want to say, well, Georgia almost lost to Ohio State. Well, Georgia obliterated TCU 60-70. And you guys lost to them. You guys lost to the same team that got pasted and got their blood drawn all over the field by Georgia. But yeah, you think you're a better team than them? Where do you have the advantage at over Georgia? Where? Other than quarterback, where's the advantage? I love your running backs. Okay, I'll give you the advantage at running back. I ain't gonna lie. I kind of did forget that y'all got Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. All right, cool. But still, are you going to be able to have those guys go crazy against Georgia with how stout they are against the run? Like, when's the last time you can remember Georgia just getting absolutely shredded on the ground by somebody? It's been a while. Michigan's style is really equivalent to Georgia's. And that's why I don't think they're going to be able to beat Georgia. You're not going to beat Georgia trying to play bully ball. And that's what Jim Harbaugh's philosophy is. They want to bully you. They're going to be more physical than you. And you're not going to do that to Georgia. Georgia is just Michigan cranked up 1,000 times. TCU, when they were getting blown out at halftime after one touchdown, Sonny Dykes, they had a camera cut to him on the sideline, and he was going, wow. You want to know why Sonny Dykes was going, wow, when they were getting blown out against Georgia? Because he did not know the kind of talent and athleticism that Georgia had until he actually seen it up close. The kind of guys that they have on that defensive line are different. They recruit a different kind of athlete on the interior. Michigan, you guys recruit really good interior offensive linemen and defensive linemen, but they don't have the kind of athleticism that Georgia has. Georgia has the size, the athleticism, the power, the speed, and the skills. I think Michigan is more of those teams that is more power than they are finesse. And that's what a lot of people have misunderstood about Georgia. You see, Georgia can beat you ground and pound. They can out-physical you, but they also can beat you throwing the football through the air like what they showed against Ohio State. Michigan is not a better team than Georgia. And, you know, I had to get this off my chest because I didn't really plan on talking about this because I didn't think it was a lot of people out there that really were ranking Michigan over Georgia. But I heard Colin Cowherd say that Michigan was a better team than Georgia. I saw a couple of rankings on Twitter that came out that had Michigan being better than Georgia. Like, I just had enough of the disrespect, bruh. Like, I really don't think some of you Big Ten fans truthfully understand how good Georgia is. You guys just try to root for Michigan because you just want the SEC dominance to stop. Listen, like, there's a team out there that has a great shot at beating Georgia in the Big Ten, and I think it's Ohio State, not Michigan. They got a better team that's more equipped to go up against Georgia and have success. It's the reason why Ohio State came a field goal shy or 1 point shy of upsetting Georgia and beating them and making it to the national championship versus what you did the last time you played Georgia and got embarrassed on national television. The Wolverines are not better than the Bulldogs, and I hope we get to see Michigan and Georgia in the national championship. So once again, everybody can find out why Georgia reigns supreme. This program is on a different level in college football right now. You may think that you recruit monsters up front, but you haven't seen nothing yet compared to Georgia. Be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. And when it happens, it might not be what you expect.